Hi, I'm Jaybrook, and for the past 9 months or so, I've been working on a tower defense game with roguelike and deck builder elements. If you don't know, the premise of the game is that you defend a core in the center of the map by placing towers on the field that give you special buffs. You then move turrets around the field, connect them to various towers, and then defend against swarms of enemies. The idea for the game had been brewing in my mind for a long time, way back even before the early prototypes that you might have seen in the first devlog. But in my early days as a game developer, I often felt that my skills were outmatched by my ambitions, and so I focused more on mechanical games that were easier to work on, while avoiding more complex genres like strategy games or management type games. But after coming off of my first Steam release, Skellies Ain't Scary, I felt like the gap between my skills and my ambitions was beginning to close. A few months after releasing Skellies Ain't Scary, I hadn't really done much game development and was raring to go again. At this point, it was beginning to feel like the stars were aligning for me and telling me to finally get working on that game idea I'd been having for so long now. Yet now, after 9 months of work sunk into this project, I'm giving up on it. Let me explain. To recap what happened in the last devlog, I turned the prototype of my idea into something more fleshed out by roughing out the art, gameplay loop, and solving some game design issues. Following this devlog, I decided to shift more of my attention back to my studies because I was getting into my final exam seasons. But in my free time, I still worked on the game here and there, and eventually let a few of my friends playtest the game. But much to my dismay, the overwhelming opinion was that the game just wasn't fun. It was pretty alarming to me at the time, but I tried to keep cool and went to work on figuring out how to make the gameplay more engaging. I tried to adhere to the rule of fail often and fail fast, so I decided a bold move was needed here as the core gameplay itself seemed to be the problem. This was where the first divergence from the path started as I remade the gameplay loop by scrapping one of its core mechanics. Originally, for every wave of enemies you survive, you get to pick one tower to add to your field. These towers cannot be moved once they are placed, and they have to be placed before the next round starts. So the players would need to consider how their placements would affect their chances next round, since the effects of these towers only cover a limited range on the field. But I felt that this was a bit obtuse, and went for something more standard, and allowed players to pick towers from a hand of cards instead. These towers could be then deployed even while the round was going on. And to ensure the players didn't go ham with the towers, I added a credit system so they would have to deploy towers at the cost of credits, which were earned by killing enemies. Instead of picking one new tower between rounds to add to your board, your chosen card would instead go into your deck, and the amount of cards you had would correlate to the likelihood of the card appearing in your hand. All this did a lot to help make the game more fun and engaging, because players could now make real-time decisions that had more immediate impact on their survival. A couple quick playtests revealed that the new changes were definitely steps in the right direction. At this point, I was more relieved than anything. I thought this was a small trip up in an otherwise smooth sail to finishing the game. All in all, I still believe that I was set to finish the alpha of the game very soon. After getting past that crisis, I felt like this was it. The game had finally found its footing, and all it needed was some balancing and a fresh coat of paint before it would be ready to hit itch. So I started balancing the game as best as I could. But as I continued to toy with how to make the game more fun, I realized that there was another aspect of the gameplay loop I hadn't really taken into consideration. Initially, players were rewarded for finishing a round by letting them add one tower to their field. But when the game switched to letting them deploy towers whenever they wanted, the reward of adding cards to your deck became much less exciting. After all, while initially it felt like you were slowly building a good field of towers over time, you could now do that whenever you wanted, only at the cost of credits. In that sense, the game lost a lot of its pacing. This would be the second time the game diverged from its path as I gave it a new makeover. But unlike the last makeover, I wasn't exactly sure what the solution to this problem was yet. And instead of waiting patiently and taking my time with it, I rushed the process because I thought I was so close to the end. What I ended up with was a poorly executed mess of an idea that overall didn't even make sense. By now, I was starting to feel the consequences of constantly and hastily redoing these huge portions of code. GameMaker Studio 2 doesn't have built-in UI support, so unlike Unity where you can drop a button in within seconds, coding a single button usually takes at least 5 minutes and about 20 lines of code in GMS2. Extrapolate that to dozens of buttons, text, UI elements, effects, and transitions, and you end up with a huge headache. The codebase was a mess of variables that were either redundant or repurposed but not renamed, so they ended up confusing me on what they were for. At this point, I decided to just take a break and focus on my exams. By the time I had graduated from my course, working on this game was something I had come to dread. I wanted nothing more than to just move on, so in one last attempt to push through, I resolved to give the game a new coat of paint, finish the gameplay loop, and launch it on itch as is. So I commissioned my friend Scamius, who helped me out with some of the key art and a few sprites. Meanwhile, I worked on redoing the tower sprites, changing their vibe from wacky shrines and statues to sleek machine-looking gadgets that fit with the turret sprites better. The new sprites turned out better than I thought, but ultimately the fresh coat of paint just wasn't going to fix the deep-rooted issues at heart. By then, I was reworking the UI for the third time. Everything was a hot, sticky mess. I was essentially making guesses at what certain portions of code did because everything was so convoluted. And because I was essentially working blind and stumbling through the dark, bugs popped up like crazy all of the time. Eventually, it just became too much. I sat myself down, took a good look at the project, and shut it down. Right now, it sits in my folder of abandoned projects and waits for the day it may be dusted off. When that is, I don't know. I just know that working on the game as it is now would only be a detriment to everyone involved. It's honestly a bit of a shame. I had thought that the concept of the game was great and the gameplay turned out to be pretty fun, albeit incomplete. I had some pretty grand plans for the project and was even considering a commercial release on Steam at one point. But all my poor decisions over time kind of came back to bite me in the ass. And at this point, a whole refactoring of the codebase is the only thing that could save it. With all that said and done, I don't regret this project at all. It pushed me to really get down and dirty with the art, and tackling so many tough game design problems was a new thing for me. And while yes, an argument could be made that finishing projects, even when they get tough, is an important lesson to learn, I feel like I've already learned that. It took me 1.5 years of work to finish my first Steam release, and it's certainly a valuable thing to learn. But I've already done my dues and run the gauntlet. I'm sorry that this video, which was supposed to be a simple update on the progress of the game, suddenly turned out to be such a depressing downward spiral. But rest assured that I'm all the better for it now, and I actually have plans for what to do over the next few months. So if you want to see more of what I get up to, please do subscribe. Thanks for watching.